Miss Gürgel, welcome to the Aligned Founder podcast. How are you feeling today?
Really good. Thank you so much for having me, Pete.
You're very welcome. We've had a fun day together already.
Yes.
How did we spend it?
Well, we were closing out the first portion of the breathwork training. You're training some breathwork facilitators right now here in Berlin. And yeah, just had a really nice closing journey and a smooth, let's say, chat and just closing and goodbyes with them before heading over here.
Yeah, it's really nice and really great to have you also joining as one of the support team on that. It's been a busy week, I'd imagine, or a couple of weeks, but landing back from Bali.
Yes. Yeah.
How's that process been, coming back to Germany?
Yeah, very interesting this time. I have to say I was really glad that the training and now also this interview, for example, is happening this weekend, because I feel that it's really helped me to find some ground and just really finding a little bit of structure for coming back. Because Bali for me is always very different, very expansive in its energy and just a very different rhythm. And so it usually takes a little bit for me to adjust. And just having these, let's say, commitments was really helpful in that process.
And you're someone who spent quite some time over the years in Bali. However, I think this time it's a little different because you're there with daughter now.
Yeah.
So how has that been?
Yeah, really beautiful. It was, I have to say she was born there. So it was really nice actually
She's a local.
Yeah, true. Yes. It was really nice to kind of bring her back to her birthplace and just connect with the locals and some friends that we still have there. And it was really special because my partner was there with us for a while, and then he returned to Germany a little bit early because of his work, and then I stayed a bit longer with her, which was also a really nice and beautiful experience for me and her, I think, and also for us as a family, to realize that that's possible, and that even though we are this family, that we don't always have to be in the same place all the time. And I think that's really been a very enjoyable experience, and really created some space for all three of us.
Yeah, I get the sense that you're not exactly following the cookie cutter German family model.
Probably not.
But we'll talk about that more later, maybe.
Yes, definitely.
About how that actually looks in reality.
Yes, definitely.
So maybe you want to kick us off by just a little 2-minute overview of your bullet points, your CV of who you are.
Yeah, sure. My name is Pia Gürgel. You already introduced me. I am nowadays, I'm a breathwork facilitator and coach. I'm a mama of a 16-month-old. And my big passion, I would say, nowadays is really breathwork and learning, and now also moving more and more into teaching about the nervous system. Because it's just that understanding and wisdom and just many things I've learned over the years through just exploring my own nervous system has brought so much change into my own life. And I just feel really passionate to share this work with other people in just different formats and ways. In the past, some years back, I had a really different life. I was working a corporate job as a project manager, and just had this, I would say, quote unquote, ideal life. And kind of ticking all the boxes
Classic.
with, classic thing, following kind of the path that I think, I don't know, just felt in a way quite natural for me after high school to follow.
You grew up where?
Here in Germany, in Hamburg, in Germany. Yeah. I had a little detour of initially I studied journalism, and then at some point I finished that degree, but then I was really disencouraged, and I didn't have, at that time, I think the trust in myself that I could really pursue and follow that career, for different reasons. There was just a lot of, in the field around me of people just telling me, there's no work in this field. It's really hard to get a job. And at that time, I think I wasn't stable enough, or I didn't have the trust in myself that I could still make it somehow. So I ended up changing careers, following another degree, basically, kind of the classical thing, which felt more secure, was business. From there, I ended up working and just following this really traditional path of like, doing something with business and like finding a really safe job and like, doing all these things.
Yeah. So how long did that last and what did that look like?
So after university, probably like around 5 years or so. Yeah, it was 5 years, I think. Although I have to say, I think after 3 years, I had come to a point where even though I was still quite young, but like in the first job I had at that time, I was quite early on promoted well, and like I just received a lot of chances, I would say. And so quite early on, I had a lot of responsibility for big campaigns and projects and things. But like after 3 years, I think it was the first time that I realized, okay, I'm actually not really happy here. And I need to change something. And I can share a bit more about that possibly. But it then took another 2 years for me to fully come to a point where I was like, okay, now I'm courageous enough to actually say, okay, I'm quitting my job, which probably isn't the answer for everyone. Yeah. But for me at that time it was, because I felt like, okay, if I'm staying somehow in this industry or somehow in a job that's really demanding, I'm not going to be able to find out what I really want to do in life or with my life. So for me, the answer was to actually quit my job and then to go in a little bit of a journey and explore.
And why do you think it took 2 extra years? Because it's typically something people have, like there's a cognitive knowing or maybe even a feeling that I should do that or it's not aligned, but then they just don't do anything. Why do you think that was for you?
Yeah. For me, it was probably 2 things. So after these 3 years, when I had that realization, I wanted to change something. It was on a sabbatical, like on a journey, and I was really far away actually from home. So I think first of all, that allowed me to take a completely different perspective on my life. Yeah. And I think I could all of a sudden see really clearly, also being away from like demands of my job and stress and pressure. I could all of a sudden see what wasn't working in my life or what actually wasn't really in line with my truth, or what didn't feel like it was, aligned for me actually. So I had that moment of kind of stepping out, breaking out maybe also, and knew I had to change something. And the first thing for me was actually to quit my job and then return. And moving into a different job, which was already a lot different. But when once I got back home, I think reality hit me a little bit. I was like, okay, now I quit my job, but what do I do now? Like, I mean, I had some savings, but I think I was quite attached to a lot of beliefs also around like, okay, financial beliefs or monetary beliefs, but also like, I had some ideas and what I would want to do instead, but I really didn't have the trust and courage to pursue that further at that point. And I think it just took those 2 years to get a little bit of courage, but then at the same time also to at some point hit a point where I was like, okay, like I'm like the pain almost of staying in this old setup became too big.
Yes.
So that's when I was like, okay, I think I just have to like take this leap of faith and just try it out.
There's a classic saying, we only change when the pain of change becomes less than the pain of staying the same.
Yes.
So it's like less so that I'm going towards the shiny object, but oftentimes, at least for that first push, I think until we get that new momentum, where we're like more generative, moving towards something positive, I think that first one needs to be more of like a falling out of instead of falling into.
Definitely. And I would also say for me, when I look back, it probably also felt a little bit like I had opened a door and I had kind of peeked into, and I think I had a strong intuition or feeling that like something else was waiting there for me if I somehow managed to kind of move more towards the door or like kind of keep exploring. But then there was so much holding me back that I kept on seeing this door, and at some point I was just like, okay, like crap, I just need to move towards it and like see if I can open it further and see what else is awaiting there, like on the other side, or if I walk through. But I couldn't, as long as I was kind of still really tied up in this old structure, and also with just a lot of my time bound to my work or something else that didn't give me a lot of space to follow my personal interests and explore probably also what I really wanted out of life, because I was always really busy and
we were looking at a scene from my musical that you saw before earlier, and that's kind of written around that very typical story, which you know can seem very unique, but it is that one that many people face, which is like waking up one day to realize that they've done, like the song is like, there's gotta be more to this life. I'm doing all the things that they told me to do, but I still feel empty inside.
Yeah.
You know, and that's really it. It's like following a path, like almost like with blind faith and trust that it will bring me to the promised land of all these things that I want.
Yes.
And then almost like getting to a certain stage on that and realizing, nothing seems to change. And then maybe looking ahead and seeing people 15, 20 years ahead in the same company that are even more burnt out and stressed and sick, and going, okay, that'll be me, you know?
Yeah.
And then looking around and realizing that no one else seems to notice because they're too busy doing the thing, you know, chasing the path. So what was for you, the real, like that period of like breaking away and like seeing all those patterns that you'd just been living in before?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think that period started for me with traveling more. And one big thing that I realized over time, I think at that point, like when I was traveling or back then, I'm not sure if I just didn't have that awareness, but I think nowadays it's really clear to me that when I was traveling, or then also eventually spending a lot of time in Bali, where there's I mean, I'm sure you can find in different places too, but for me, that place was Bali. And just being surrounded by a lot of people that have a very different way of living.
Sure.
That over time I noticed has opened me up to actually realize, okay, there's like not this one path which I've been following, but there's so many different ways how to do life or how to live life. Yeah. And when I look back at my like younger self, I think I like the way I was raised probably, or just how I grew up. There were maybe some ways presenting themselves to me tied to certain careers. So it's not like I had only this one single choice and way. But compared to how I live nowadays, for example, it feels much more liberated, much more free, and much more aligned with what I really, truly want in life. And a big step in moving towards that was definitely being surrounded more by people that have done that for themselves, or have created that for themselves as well, like really just kind of living life in their own unique way instead of following this one path, or like the kind of the construct of society in some ways maybe. Yeah.
It's almost like, this is a fun analogy I just came up with. It's almost like going to a restaurant and they give you the menu and you open it and it's like, it seems like there's only one page and it's just the starters, and it's like, you know, rice and bread, and you're like, okay, this is it. And then someone else showing you how to turn the page and seeing, wow, all these amazing dishes and dessert. Wow, what's that, you know?
Yeah, beautiful really analogy.
Opening the mind to what's possible, that most people, if they didn't look deeper and further, they would live their whole life eating bread and rice. Yeah,
definitely. And I still have that. Like, and for me, it's not about comparing myself to someone else, but I think if I meet someone new or someone even I know, but like then I hear something about their own life or what they're doing, pursuing, or just kind of what they are creating from themselves, it opens up something in me too, because it's almost like something is unlocked around like, oh, this is also possible. And then in my mind, like my mind just actually becomes a lot wider, I would say. And just there's a lot more.
Stretches.
Yeah, it stretches. And there's all of a sudden there's so many more possibilities. Just how to do life, and like how to do relationships, how to do family, how to work, all of it. And it becomes more colorful, I would say.
Absolutely. So tell me then about like the process of like, so leaving the old life, and then there's this kind of like purgatory or this kind of gap phase. I'm wondering, how is that for you? Did you find yourself maybe wanting to go back into like find a similar job, or like snap back just out of like fear, or say like finding safety? Or
yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I have to smile at my younger self a little bit, because I think when I left my corporate job, I can now see that I was still very identified with a lot of patterns. So I think my initial thought was like, okay, I'm gonna take some time, and like I had some savings luckily, so I was like, okay, I can make it for some months now, and I can just take a few months to travel, but then in like 6 months I'll have it figured out, like what I want to do instead, and then I'll build my business and like be self-employed or like freelance, and then everything will be perfect. Yeah. And then that didn't really happen. So
it's kind of like the next layer. It's like the first one is if I just follow this path that has been set out for me, everything will be perfect. And it's like, well, that didn't work. So instead, I'll do this second path, which seems to work, and then it'll be perfect.
Yeah, I think that, so. I mean, the common theme was that, like, when I left my corporate job, one thing I knew, a lot of things I didn't know, but one thing I knew was that I've always enjoyed working with other people, especially also like, I mean, I had different positions, but like essentially what I really liked in my role as a project manager mostly was to be able to, because oftentimes I was managing other people, and I really loved the part where I could get them or like support them in kind of growing within their own role. So that's something I think I knew that I took from my old job with me, that I really like to work with people and like support them in their own progress or like in their own.
Like a little crumb.
Yeah, so it was really it was really breadcrumb, and I didn't really know what else. I think in the beginning I also didn't know that I would end up in coaching and then essentially or eventually breathwork. But yeah, it was like the first crumb, and then. Yeah, I just went to travel for a bit. I then realized, okay, 6 months passed, nothing has happened, or well, it hasn't manifested what I would what I was thinking. I then ended up actually co-founding something with two of my friends, but it was right before COVID, and then we were just kind of working on it and building it up. It was like kind of like a co-working space for coaches and therapists and like. Energy workers and all of it. But because of COVID, like we had taken kind of the first steps, but then in Germany, at least there was like a really big lockout and a lockdown. And all of a sudden, like all the events, everything we had planned, like nothing worked out anymore. And then we also had some like personal differences about like where we were headed. And then we kind of failed with it. But when I look back at it, I think it was really important because at least for myself, I can say that it was kind of still my safety net, that like to work together with them or like to co-found it instead of like going full in on my own. And meanwhile, I had started with like some different trainings and certifications because by then I knew I would want to move more towards coaching, and I also knew I wanted to do breathwork because I had at some point like a really powerful first breathwork session, and even before that session, I kind of knew that there's something for me. And then I had that session. I was like, okay, I will work with this at some point in my life. And then it took a long time, actually, because of COVID also, until I then trained with our teacher. Yes. But it all made sense when I look back at it.
Totally. So one question I have on that, because it would be very easy for us to go down the very stereotypical route of, I worked in the typical job and I didn't like it. And then I went on the sabbatical and, then I tried these things and then my life has changed and now my life is perfect. So I'd love to like demystify some of these. Like, let's say someone's in a position where they're working in like a consulting job, or they've got like an agency, or they're like in some position that's like quite good, but they're like, not sure if it's really doing it for me anymore.
Yes.
And then maybe they're thinking, I should take a sabbatical. Or like take a break and find out what I really want. What are some of the things, the dark sides of a sabbatical that people don't usually talk about? So like black sabbatical kind of thing.
I mean, I can only probably just share from my own experience, but what I noticed or learned was definitely that, I mean, it brought up all my, or like not all of them, but a lot of my stuff that I hadn't looked at before, just because I was so busy, right? And then all of a sudden, at least for my sabbatical, I mean, I had planned it as like some traveling and then some trainings at some point. But even with this traveling, I realized that I just kept going in my old pace. Like I just kept busy. And at some point I realized, okay, I'm kind of repeating the same thing, but like I don't have to do that for myself. And I actually, like I'm still in my patterns, but I'm like, I wanted a sabbatical and I wanted to travel to like find some rest and create space for myself. But I'm still keeping myself busy and distracted. So
instead of team meetings, you're doing like 5 walking tours in a day.
Yeah, kind of like that. So there was one really big realization that I mean, you kind of just take your own patterns and your stuff with yourself.
Totally.
I think probably because you have less commitment, or I had less commitments at least to other people, I was then though very confronted with it at some point. And I kind of couldn't look away anymore. I couldn't push it away because before I was I had these obligations to other people, right? So I could always prioritize that. And then I didn't have that. And so I had this structure for myself that I had created. But then, I mean, I was just confronted with my own stuff. So that was something that, at least for me in my sabbatical, was kind of the darker side to it.
I think really getting acquainted with the inner critic in those times, because the inner critic is something that, like, when you're working and you need to be efficient, it's something that's very good at keeping you productive. But when the intention is to, you know, from a health perspective or from a mindset to sit around and relax, inverted commas, then you really just get that dialed up. But it's like, if it was dialed up in a work context, it would be actually moving us towards a goal and identifying with like whatever identity we've created for ourselves. Like, I am X role, this is my job. And therefore it's aligned. Whereas the inner critic, if it's been trained to perform tasks at a high level of, you know, productivity, that is not going to like sitting around on the beach in Thailand reading a book.
Yeah, totally. I would even say that even after that sabbatical and after starting like kind of to freelance or doing my own thing, that inner critic, that kept me busy for years. And so much that even though I had moved out of this corporate job and like that corporate environment, I think it was like 2021 or so, where, because I still kept quite busy, I actually kind of again hit a point where I almost burned out. But this time it wasn't because someone else was like stressing me or putting pressure on myself, because it was because I was doing that for myself. Which was also really hard actually to like realize and to kind of find peace with, and then also to change. Because it's been so ingrained of like being productive, doing things. And it's so interesting because, like, I mean, of course, if you are self-employed, there's always stuff you can do. Like it never really stops. So it's actually really challenging to find a good balance.
It's like the infinite game. There's no end.
Yeah, and especially, I mean, also, and you know that probably, like, if you love what you do, it's beautiful, right? But then it can still burn you out. And still not be healthy in that way that it doesn't actually, or isn't sustainable over a long time.
I did an interview with Annika Brandt, who's also from Hamburg and also a ex-business burnout into breathwork practitioner. And I think similar story where she ended up having like a second burnout doing a business she was actually really passionate about. Because it was a mix of like now having the same drive, but also then combining it with something that, I really need to do this to help people. Like, so, you know, stepping more into like wanting to do it. And so what has it been? So like, you know, we're going to go into your journey now with like exploring the second mountain, as it would be. But what have been the things that have allowed you to approach that with a different energy to how you did the first one?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say breathwork. Yeah. I mean, it was a little bit before I found breathwork that I hit this point. Or, well, not that I found it, like I knew breathwork at that point, but I wasn't trained as like a facilitator. But I think actually a big part of my own training was through that, like, deeper understanding of the nervous system, like actually understanding, I think, probably for the first time, to be honest, what was going on within my own self and with my own nervous system. And then it being also quite confronting to realize that we have this concept around the window of tolerance, right? Like that I've probably lived in a state within this window that was very high up and not very, like that the kind of counterbalance of also creating more rest and like time for relaxation, or actually the ability to really relax, wasn't so developed for me. So I would say I probably had some times where I relaxed, but I definitely had that very strong inner critic of like, okay, you need to keep going and you have to do this and that. And then like it really interfered with my capacity and ability to truly relax.
Just to explain that, like the window of tolerance concept, I think it's really good. So imagine this thing of like there's a window or like a space in which, if we can kind of live there and like move between activation and relaxation in our day or in our week or our year, then we're more likely to experience like life in a very easeful and joyous way, where we can like really be present for things. We can work hard. We can do things that are enjoyable. We can travel, you know, all that kind of thing. And then as long as we're like not exceeding and pushing too hard, and also balancing that with periods of rest and recharge, then we can actually, that's really the sweet spot in which we can enjoy life. Now, outside of the window of tolerance, we've also got this thing called our capacity, which is kind of like our 1 rep max, or like what's the maximum we could do if needed. So maybe if I was sitting here today and I feel very tired and sleepy and not really like doing much, but then a tiger came into the room, I'm not going to sit here and go, oh, but I'm kind of tired and sleepy. If the tiger comes in, then my body will find the energy from somewhere to get the hell out of the room, you know, because it's fight or flight, like get out of there or you're going to die. So, you know, my capacity is what I have the ability to do, you know, technically. And then my window of tolerance is what actually is sustainable and feels comfortable. So I think what we find a lot in, you know, more these like high-paced work environments, also for founders and entrepreneurs, is people living at the top of their window of tolerance and even pushing outside of it sometimes. And that's possible to do. Like from a survival standpoint, if there's a tiger, then we need to be able to do that. Okay, it's how we have survived as, you know, a species. The people who couldn't live outside the window of tolerance didn't make it, you know. However, if we normalize that and normalize that feeling as just our way of existing, then a lot of people can get very, you know, shocked when they end up basically burning out, which is as a result, like the burnout is a result of living outside of the window of tolerance at the maximum of our capacity for too long. Yeah. And I think really understanding that on a foundational level is, for most people, particularly who've come from like a corporate background, is pretty confronting and makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So how does that, like if you were to look back on your, let's say your time in the corporate world and project manager and work in that, what would you say are like the 3 biggest patterns that you were doing or living that if you look back now through the lens of like understanding the nervous system, how would you look back and say, oh, wow, I was really doing that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely living for a big chunk of my life back then outside of my window of tolerance. And interestingly, I mean, you were just speaking about the tiger, right? But like in, let's say, this corporate environment, like the tiger can be your boss pushing you to do something, or it can be, let's say, an email that you receive. Or for me, I can speak from my perspective that I was receiving like at 10 p.m. with a lot of requirements that should have been met in the next morning or something. Like, so the tiger representing like different stressors, basically.
Sure. Yeah. And within that, I would say the tiger, like, even though it's just an email, which is a bunch of words in a, you know, electronic mail, whatever, sent to your inbox, it's what it represents. And I would say it's the survival fears hidden underneath that, i.e. if I don't do this, I will be shamed, I'll be fired, I'll lose my livelihood, I'll lose my reputation. I'm going to die, basically. At some level. Yeah. It's like anchoring that email at 10 p.m. to like basically being abolished or kicked out of your company and then not being able to live. Yeah, so definitely living, I'd like to come back to your initial question about the patterns. Definitely, yeah, just because I also really wanted to like fulfill everyone's expectations, I think, because as a project manager, it's a tricky position because oftentimes you're in the middle of like everyone, kind of. So the mediator.
The mediator. But then, at least in my experience, I often was in positions where I was mediating, but then also kind of trying to keep everyone happy. Or to negotiate between the different parties and like kind of, and at the same time also needing to prioritize like what is really important, what has to be done and what can maybe wait. So it was a lot of, just negotiating, mediating. But then also I probably actually have quite a strong people-pleasing pattern. So that was also at times quite confronting to then be in that position of having to tell people no. And I think when I look back, like in honesty, I probably also had some moments where it wasn't easy for me to actually establish a boundary or just tell someone really clearly, no, it's just not possible or we can't do it. And then because I wasn't able to really communicate that clearly, then it became a little bit messy and like probably spirals, and it probably created actually more work for some other people. So I can see that now. Like back then, I think I was just trying to please everyone and like keep all the balls up in the air. Also because there were so many demands and all the different interests. So that probably be the second pattern that I can really see when I look back. Just trying to make everyone happy, keep everyone in harmony, also with me. And then also definitely not wanting to create any reason basically for someone else to judge me or shame me or like be angry with me personally. Because I think when I look back at it, I think a lot of the things I took personal. And it was interesting because I had a boss that she was kind of like, sometimes she was really happy with me and like really caring. And then at sometimes it was completely flipped. And then she would be like super mad and kind of expose me also in meetings in front of everyone. And like, it would feel really shitty kind of, and like make me basically the bad guy or like the responsible for all kinds of mistakes that even though they were not mine, maybe. So when I think I had a strong pattern of trying to avoid that, like to put myself into positions where someone could like attack me or like have any reason basically to prove that I was wrong or like doing something wrong or not perfect in the way.
And there's something really interesting about like when you're sharing that, I was reflecting because like as adults, we've got the ability to critically think and to see things through other people's eyes and from perspectives. And a lot of the time we can maybe rationally know that if someone just turns up, let's say to work, and they're just angry and shouting at us for no reason, then it's probably their stuff. However, when we're younger and we're more, we'll say, egocentric, or we see the world like through our eyes only, and almost like we're the center of the universe. So we would look outside and think like, oh, if things are happening, it must be because I'm good or bad or because of something I did. So daddy comes home late and is angry from work, maybe it's my fault. You know, so there's constant question. So I almost feel like if we've had in our early life, whether it's conscious or not, these experiences of feeling not enough or like things are our fault or that we should do better or that, you know, we're not worthy of something, then those can be replayed in situations that bring up or like trigger, as we could say, those earlier responses. So for instance, your boss turning around and embarrassing you or saying, oh, you're so bad in front of everyone can basically trigger or reactivate an old, let's say, shame response when you were told you were bad for doing something, for messing around in the house, or like, for instance, I used to always draw on my walls with markers, apparently. You know? Very creative from an early age, but you know what I mean? It's like, if we're shamed or punished for something early on, then that like basically gets imprinted as a story, like a core kind of coding. And then later on, when we have situations in a very, you know, normal adult environment, as you said, instead of being able to look at her and go, what's going on in her that's making her do this hot, cold kind of behavior? It's like, oh no, it must be me. I have to do better. I should do more. Or I have to keep everyone happy so then they don't not like me. So then, you know, it's so funny because like, I'm sure you can do all the, you know, organizational workshops and executive coaching and stuff. But if we're not looking at like what's at the real core of this stuff, then it's going to be pulling the strings without us realizing, I find.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, also looking back at, let's say, for example, that situation, I can see that I think I was also really, like, my self-worth was really tied to what I would achieve or like how happy I would make other people kind of.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, with that also, I mean, but if you take that away, then it's quite challenging, right? Because then you lose, like I was, like a big chunk of my identity, I think, was tied to this whole job. And then, yeah, as you said, like how I was feeling probably about myself was also like in direct correlation to if I did well in this job or not. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not really healthy, actually.
Well, yeah, it's what we call external self-worth.
Yes.
So it's almost like, yeah, going around and I would say like, yeah, like going to different petrol stations and needing to fill up your petrol tank. And no matter what price they're charging, we need to pay it because if we don't do it, then we're going to crash. We've got no fuel. And then one day realizing you've got the internal powering Tesla battery, which drives itself, you know, which is the internal self-worth, which is like, it's nice to receive praise and compliments from people. We don't need them to keep going.
Yeah.
You know? And I think that's a shift that, like, you know, again, these things, like, they got to come from somewhere. Sure. Like you, let's say, having attachment to your performance, I'm sure you didn't just learn that as soon as you started corporate. Like, it's going to have been there to some degree earlier, even if that wasn't intentional. Yeah. You know, from your upbringing, like it could be from teachers or even parents, but they were probably in some ways wanting the best. Yes. But at some point, the two of them get tied together. Definitely, yeah. Be basically just then repeated as like, this is a rule of life. This is what I must do. I don't question it because I'm not even aware it's happening. It's just how it is, how the world is. Yeah, that's so interesting because like I really feel
the more I've done my own inner work, or also work with a lot of my clients, the deeper my understanding is that like how interesting that is actually, how sometimes these deep inner beliefs really create what we think is possible in life, and then also like basically how big the box of life is that we create for ourselves.
Totally.
And I mean, another pattern I think that also was really present in that time was probably the desire to like do it right, like to just do the right thing, or also to know the answer. And like not knowing something or not doing something right, like was terrifying for me.
Sure.
Yeah, it was really terrifying, and like create a lot of fear and like internal stress also.
And like, just to speak to how that might manifest then in terms of how we structure our life, because if that is a deep-seated fear that the subconscious never wants to touch with a stick, you know, keep away, then I'd imagine you were probably creating scenarios where either in situations where you could be made vulnerable, there was a lot of anxiety because someone could poke that, or you're maybe avoiding situations where you might have to be seen or expected as an authority to answer questions on something you might not know perfectly.
Yeah.
And so the thing can be like, if that pattern is running and existing, how many areas of life are we subconsciously closing ourselves off from that could actually be very fulfilling?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I would say yes to all the two you just mentioned. For myself, I can also see, I think I also had let's say like a coping mechanism around like trying to protect myself just by making sure, for example, I had proof of certain things, like how meetings went or like what was discussed, and like always keeping a lot of notes so that in case someone would like attack me or like try to find the error or the mistake or something, I could kind of have proof and be like, no, it was different. Like we discussed it in a different way and that. And I was in my work life, but then I think unconsciously also that played out in other areas of my life as well, which it often does, right? Because it's not that separate. Like, because like what we have in, or like how we are in one area of life, often there's also correlation to other areas.
Totally. So you mentioned about going down the route of, you know, connected breathwork and that really opening the box on a deep level. So, you know, these patterns that you were playing out, you mentioned like doing it right, people pleasing, that kind of thing, avoiding of being seen by way, external self-worth. How were you confronted with those in your journey with diving into connected breathwork? How did they show up in that journey?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think the people pleasing and doing it right, that's really easy for me to see that. Also, like I think in the beginning of my training, for example, like I really I think I just wanted to be liked by my teacher, for example. So like kind of small situations, but I think, it's just playing out in many different ways, like wanting to be liked by the teacher or the other people in the training. But then also doing it right, like even, and I see that a lot with my clients too, like some people that try or like kind of find their way into breathwork, that there's a strong desire to just do it right? Yeah. And understandably, because I mean, we all want to be right in some way. So I think in the first few weeks of my training, a big shift for me was like to really understand that I don't have to do much actually with this kind of way of breathing or with our technique. And that actually a big part of it is the surrender and like especially with, without going into all the details, but like with that exhale, like to really just allowing things to happen without forcing and pushing too much. So that was a really big shift for me, I think.
Totally.
Yeah, and then self-worth as well. Like I think in general, I would say breathwork has really helped me to find a deeper connection to myself. And then through that, has helped me also to kind of bring the my own energy or also the intention back to myself. So instead of seeking it outside and instead of seeking validation from someone else, I feel much more capable to just give that to myself.
Yeah.
So, and that's a big shift because then I'm not so dependent on anything that's happening on the outside. Like I can like stay in my own center and not to like close myself off from the world, but like, just give this to myself.
It's kind of like be the love you seek.
Yes. Yeah.
It's funny how like that world and that practice of connected breathwork, how it can be such a interesting mirror. So there was a situation like a while back at a group event, or like at a workshop, when there was one person who came, and like it's pretty typical. where, you know, a group of people turn up, they sit on yoga mats, we explain the technique, they lie down, they do it for an hour, they go through various processes, they talk about it afterwards, and then they leave, and it's super simple. But within that, because it's such a, you know, clean, simple format, we often see if there's someone who comes in who has a strong tendency to be in a certain way or behavior pattern, it's very obvious, you know, it really stands out because it's such a, like a sore, it just stands out so much. So there was one person who came to a circle recently who was like, you know, we explained it as always, as I've maybe done like, you know, nearly probably 100 times at this point. And, you know, they were putting up the hand and going, yeah, but how will I know? And then, so do I just do that? And then okay. And then is that going to be okay if I do that? And it was so clearly this thing you were saying about like someone who's so intent on needing to do it right. And the fear of not doing it right is like driving them, that they would rather put up their hand and ask in front of everyone just to make sure that it was perfect, you know, because the fear of it not being perfect is so intense. And I think they're the kind of things that can be really impacting how we behave and how we see the world. And I also think it's the kind of stuff that going to those depths is something that is really possible and like can create real lasting change with this work.
Yeah, I agree. And to me, it's still fascinating up to this day that even though like a big part of the change and transformation that happens is within the actual breathwork journey, that it kind of begins in the moment someone enters the room and then until they leave. Because there's so much just already coming alive in regards to, just how, to speak from my perspective, but like how I'm relating to the people in the room, like how am I showing up, how I'm even like making eye contact or not because I feel comfortable with it or not. And there's like so many nuances and little details that already just represent or like tell a story of someone even without them going into breath, which is so fascinating.
Yeah, totally. So regarding that now, you know, I think it's 3 years ago now, you did the facilitator training.
Yes.
You were based in Bali doing work there, now back in Germany.
Yeah.
So in that last 3 years, you've probably worked with tons of different people, you know, all shapes and sizes, you know. And one topic I'm really interested in, from your perspective, is exploring, for you, the difference between male and female breathers or clients, and what are the typical patterns you see that are different between the two of them? Because I've got my own lens or my own opinion, but I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. For me, it's been very interesting because I think initially in the beginning, and it's probably a reflection of my own path or growth, but in the beginning, I was mostly attracting women. So for quite some time, I worked only with women, like naturally, not that I was kind of not open to men, but they just didn't appear. And then at some point that shifted. And then like then there was a time where I was working more with men, interestingly, and now it's kind of evened out. So I think I've seen quite a bit of men and women by now, and also, of course, in circles. And I would say the biggest thing I can see is like in women, oftentimes there's a lot of like holding and suppressing power. I see that in men too, but I often find it that especially the power part seems, for me at least, more accessible for men to like go into power, but then also maybe the correlation with like anger or even rage, it seems more accessible for men. While for men, they might more struggle, or most of my clients, with accessing like grief or sadness. And it's been interesting because I think all facilitators of us, we all attract different people, right? But I feel like I definitely know I have quite a soft way, or I have a soft side that sometimes really just comes out in breathwork sessions. And I actually see like a lot of my male clients, I think I've guided some in anger and rage as well, but a lot of them, it was more about actually softening into this other part, like the potentially crying or sadness or like sorrow, grief, kind of accessing these kinds of feelings, or also their own inner softness, actually. And with women, I see that too, but it's kind of the opposite. It's more like actually also finding the power, like finding the trust to also go into anger or rage, and then also finding more expression. I kind of feel like, especially kind of the throat area, there's a lot of times there's holding and kind of just pushing things down, swallowing it down,
Don't bother
yeah.
people. Just be nice.
Exactly. Be the nice girl. Like don't create chaos. Just kind of go with the flow. Like don't speak up for yourself. Kind of that.
Yeah.
That's kind of the reoccurring thing in many ways. And then it's really powerful if that is actually spoken out, or if there's like a little bit of liberation. It's actually like, oh, I'm like reclaiming that. Like I'm reclaiming almost my voice.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then what opens, if that opens in a like breathwork session, like how that ripples into every other area of life, because now there's a whole spectrum of expression that wasn't online. Maybe before it didn't feel safe to set boundaries or say no. Yes. So I would avoid people or situations that maybe I would otherwise feel like good to go into, but I just avoid it because the fear of not being able to say no. Whereas if you remove the fear of not being able to say no, then I open the full spectrum again. It's kind of like the example I give is, you win tickets to go on a 5-star luxury cruise, but you have this irrational fear of not being able to swim. So in the event that you could fall overboard, you would drown. And you could avoid the cruise and never get to have that experience, or you can just get swimming lessons. And then in the rare event that you would need to swim, then you could, and then you can enjoy the whole experience. So if I fear that I can't say no, then I'll avoid a situation where I may have to stand up for myself. Let's say a relationship, like maybe I'm avoiding romance or something because I might have to actually say no to someone. Whereas if I regain the ability to say no and I feel confident and powerful in myself, then I can go into that with full confidence that even if I, inverted commas, fall overboard, I can still do what needs to be done,
True. And maybe adding to that example is that, or that person is in a relationship, but then they don't feel able to say no. And so they kind of keep the peace, or they kind of want to keep the harmony. And then over time, that can also lead to like resentment and all these other things that are just repressed, right?
Yeah.
But then, that's also, just a very interesting relationship, right? Where also for the partner, it's actually not very fair, because it's like...
No.
Yeah.
Well, just to speak from my experience, I used to be someone who very much couldn't say no, and was very much like a pleaser, and would be like very comfortable to, just smile and nod, because I genuinely felt on a deep level that was the only option, even though and even there was some friends who would even like notice that sometimes they would say something, and I'd almost wince. I'd almost kind of like, oh. But then I'd just like, yeah, it's fine, and kind of smile. But they could see like, no, you just had a physical reaction, and then I like kind of worked through that, and then all good. And then maybe 2 years later, I was in a kind of dating situation, and we were getting to know each other, and it was fine, and there was some agreements made, and is that okay with you? Yeah, it's fine for me, no problem, that's great. And this works, yeah, great, that works, And then later it just exploded, like, how could you do that? I'm like, but I asked you and you said it was great. And they said, yeah, but you should have known, and it's like without having the ability to say no, you're also in some ways not giving the other person a chance to meet you where you really want to be met.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it's a big one. I continuously see, and I think that's also one of these. I like many of these patterns, right? They play out in different areas of the life. I think another big one I see also in both genders, but playing out differently, is receiving. Like, I think for women, especially if they also have maybe family or kids, it's what I often see is. They're taking care of everyone else, and like
put on everyone else's oxygen mask first.
Yeah, exactly, and like juggling the kids and the husband or the partner or like other family members and work and friends and this and that. And then, well, first of all, oftentimes they're also quite burned out, or like there's not a lot of energy left for themselves. And a lot of busyness, but then when we look behind it, there's like oftentimes some resentment, also maybe some unhappiness, but also almost an inability of actually prioritizing themselves, and also an inability to like really receive, and kind of
And probably seeing if someone else prioritized themselves, their own needs, not just like taking a luxury cruise, but just having some rest. Or giving themselves what they need, or asking for that, they would probably label them as selfish.
Oh yes, yes,
because they're so far on the other side of the spectrum that anyone that even remotely looks after themselves is considered like a narcissist. You know what I mean? In their eyes.
Yeah. I mean, it could be that, or I think kind of regressing into a state of like, I mean, for them it's okay to like do that or like prioritize themselves. But for me, it actually isn't. So it's kind of like, it can also be a little bit of like a self-worth piece or something, like if I'm, or like the savior kind of thing. Like if I can only take rest, for example, if I've taken care of everyone else, or
if I fall sick or something.
Yes.
And this is where like it gets interesting, the psychosomatic, into like the development of like chronic illness or you know, ailments and stuff, where, you know, people don't allow themselves to rest, so then their body gives them a reason, which is socially acceptable,
right,
or feels comfortable, you know. And
that I would also see in men, I think. Like it's a different quality of receiving I see in men, but especially I think about I'm thinking about like that softness piece, and like receiving care is also something I've seen with my clients before, that like maybe from their partner, but like from someone else, it's more like, oh no, I need to be like the tough man. But like, can I really allow someone else to hold space for me even? And like, can I surrender into that and like receive that? Or can I receive that from a friend that just cares? Like even if it's a male friend, like can I receive that if they just really genuinely care about me? It's also,
do I deserve that?
Yeah, do I deserve that? Is actually what is behind it, I think, oftentimes.
Because if there's some internal like exchange rate going on where I feel like a lack of self-worth and their time or energy is worth more than mine, then I'll just instantly feel bad.
Yes.
You know, and I think that shows up as well sometimes with clients where they've paid for a session and they come and then they're in the session, and then halfway through they want to get up and apologize and say, oh, well, I'm taking your time.
Yes.
You know, because they feel bad for taking time which they've paid for to do a job that I'm doing, you know. It's really interesting. But that's how deep those can run, and how it can like not just be influencing in a session, but in every area of life. Yeah, pretty crazy. One interesting thing as well, which I'd love to get your perspective on, is because there's an interesting kind of like field of discussion around the energetics of masculine, feminine, or male, female. And I'd love to hear for you personally how it's different for you to be facilitated by a male facilitator or female facilitator in breathwork. It's very different actually. I mean, like on the highest level, I would say that like I have had situations where I felt much more comfortable to be facilitated by a female practitioner. I think, like, to give an example, for example, after I've given birth, so like naturally it had felt more comfortable for me to just work with a woman for like integrating that experience for like a session or two, although I'm generally super just used to being facilitated by both genders. But I also know that there's like other topics where it actually makes sense for me to work with a man. And what would they be?
So maybe also to just give a personal example, I definitely feel like that part about receiving, or that topic that we just touched into, I have a personal relationship with that as well, and it's I can see also that pattern playing out in my life. So I think for me to be facilitated by a man is sometimes something that is actually super nourishing, because it's helping me to really develop some trust, let's say, in the masculine and that presence in my life, and just to allow that to be there more, or like even to invite it more to maybe like take care of me, or provide for me, or like just nourish me in some ways, let's put it that way, rather than always doing it in like on my own, even though I know like I have that capacity in myself, because without going down the whole rabbit hole, but like you as a man and I as a woman, we both have both energies in us, right? So I have a female or a feminine energy in me, and masculine part as well. So I know I have that side too that's really good in like managing and taking care of my own and providing for myself and all of it. But there's a growth in it when I allow that to happen through someone else.
That's a really interesting like nuance there. So what I hear is that, you know, in the receiving of support or facilitation by like a man or masculine energy in this case, that there's a different quality. Now, some people might hear that and say that that's disempowering. How would you go? Would you argue against that, or how would you feel about that?
Yeah, I don't think it's disempowering, actually, because, I'm just thinking about some clients that have worked with a male facilitator and then also with me as a female facilitator, and have also reflected back to me that it's been like a really different experience for them, but that they, just in this dynamic of man and man, were able to go into other topics than with me, for example. So I actually think it's not a disempowering experience, it's just a diversity, I think, and a possibility to potentially tap into other topics or other nuances with the opposite gender. That's how I would see it.
And what about someone who would say that, like, in those cases that gender doesn't matter?
Yeah, good point. I mean, maybe it doesn't. Like, if we break it down to, like, let's say the practice or the technique and what we're doing is, right, like as a facilitator, I'm there to create and hold the space for the breather to explore himself or herself, essentially, right? And so I am holding the space, but then a lot is happening through the breath. So if we take out the energetic component of that person, no matter what gender they are, and just break it down and come to breath and how breath moves through the person, and then maybe also analytically look more at the actual mechanics within their body, maybe it doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman. Yeah.
My experience is that there is a very different flavor in the nervous system because we have different experiences of different energetics on a like early 0 to 7 years old level. So I've found that, let's say, working through an issue with my mother is possible with a guy, but it's also way more like triggering and therefore like potential to move through with a woman, you know?
Yes.
Like if I've got dating issues, do I call a guy or a woman? Well, it depends, you know?
Yes.
But I think that there is definitely special kind of energetics that we can unlock by tapping into the nuanced kind of difference in what the natural embodiment of that provides when, you know, someone shows up just as themselves.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
No matter what that is. And like you said, that's it. It's like different energetics. Because of that, the dynamic can unlock different things. So really interesting to explore then as well how, like, in a retreat space that might show up. So we just came back, myself and Renee, who's co-founder of our company, from running a retreat in Georgia, which was 9 founders, like male entrepreneurs. And it was a really profound, powerful experience, like really enjoyable, really broad range of, like, I think the youngest was, actually, I was actually the youngest at 33. I was fucking leading the thing. And then the oldest was 73. So we had quite a range, quite a spectrum. But what I found was in the feedback we got was that there was the men there felt really just like kind of comfortable and held. And like the energetics they were shown was like at different times through their life when they were met with more that like male energy, they could tap more into their power and also healthy relating to men instead of this competition or trying to rip each other down, which there's a lot of talk about, I don't know, toxic masculinity or, you know, patriarchy or this kind of thing. And I think those kind of spaces are actually powerful because it allows people to regain the healthy side of that, you know, and to actually work through it and together so they can, you know, relate in a positive, healthy way that's actually impacting the world in a good way.
Yes.
You know? And I know that you're definitely curious about exploring those kind of offerings for women. So what do you think would be the energetics in that kind of space for, let's say, women who come from a more business background?
Yeah, I mean, especially like in the business context, I would say it might have changed a little bit over the last 5 years or so since I've stepped out. But what I've seen is that for women, like in a context where it's like mixed genders, it often leads to the fact that a woman kind of has to man up and like also get out the elbows and like kind of, I don't know if you can say it like that in English, but like kind of stand her man or like, just man up a little bit, basically. So, and I think in some ways it might just be that inner masculine part gets more activated and that it doesn't have to be a bad thing. But I wonder if that also leads to sometimes a little bit of a disconnect to that inner feminine and the softness. And So I think, or I see a potential at least for these spaces of only women coming together, like likewise, like the men just coming together to explore, okay, how, like when we come back to that more feminine essence and like through connecting and relating with other women and maybe also hearing about the challenges or struggles and like then also looking forward, like what can be a different way, like how can I actually bring some of my own actual feminine energy more into my work life or then potentially also into all areas of my life. And like how can I do that or like how can I explore it at least in a circle that might feel a little bit more safe with other women before I then go out into the world and
just try it on,
yes. Yeah, because it can, like I would imagine it's kind of the same like with men, that some topics it might just feel a lot safer to talk about with other women, especially if it relates to judgment or shame or just even or like exhaustion, embarrassment, like or just also experiences that are maybe unpleasant or uncomfortable, but they might just have had to kind of navigate them or go through them because it's in that setting there's no space to talk about it. So to bring that to another space and to look at it with like fresh eyes and also to just be held in a different way, I think is something that can be quite potent.
And also to do it in a space that like, because a lot of the time we can have past experiences. Like I went to like an all boys school. All the way through, except university. So like I had a lot of experience of this like very immature competition and one-upping and violence and physical abuse, people getting at each other, and it was pretty intense, and I imagine for women the same, it could also be the same. So I think being able to come together with people and like of that same gender and to consciously kind of rewrite those stories, I think is really powerful. Now there's a new reference point for what's possible. And I think even just having that, it's like the black swan. It disproves all the stories that like, men are bad or, that women are just going to compete and bitch, you know what I mean? Because I find when it's like, at least with guys, if we've only got a group of guys, if it's a group of guys and then there's some girls, then there's going to be some like maybe, hierarchical stuff coming in, like who's going to like be the top guy or something. And that just kind of is almost built into the culture in a way as well. Like, and I think if you remove that, at least for guys, it becomes a bit more like, oh yeah, we're just hanging out, you know what I mean? And it's much more chill. And I find then there's also less need to prove that they're a man,
Yes.
So there's no one to impress anymore. So I found actually there was a softening and an opening to more expression of emotion, you know what I mean? And maybe there's some kind of similar experience that might happen with women in a similar space with all women.
Yeah, I mean, I can also imagine because as far as I can tell or what I've seen in the past also that also within women that there's sometimes just competition going on and like creating a space where it's not about competing, but it's actually about like coming together and like sharing about the experiences and like uplifting each other and like kind of empowering each other and like or also just relating in a way where I can have a feeling of like, okay, it's not just my experience, but like there's someone else, but like how can I then feel this support and then how can I take it into my actual life or like life outside the retreat space. And with what you just said about the, like, because I think mixed groups are also quite potent and there's a lot of potential as well, but it's not just, I mean, for the men, it's probably like, how can I prove to be a man here? Or like, but for a woman, it might be like, okay, how am I seen here as a woman? Or like, is there, and then also the layer of potential attraction, right? And like, if we remove that, it can actually, because it can be quite distractive.
Totally.
And if we don't have that in there, it just brings a little bit of a different vibe and energy.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not to say that any of that is wrong. It's just looking at what are the typical programs that tend to run in the background without us realizing. And it's like, yes, it would be nicer if they weren't there, but we can also just go with the tide and let it be easy. And then I think the goal would be like bringing then eventually like groups of men or women who've done that work then together to be able to go deeper on topics that could be potentially edgy or controversial or politically debatable, and to do that from a place of grounded in themselves and in who they are as a man or a woman.
Yes.
And instead of like doing it from a place of the old we'll say programming or what they just have been around or been told to believe or say.
Yes.
And I think that could be really powerful.
I agree.
So the good news is that you're now going to be doing some work with us as our kind of head of operations, which is snaps for that one. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Hopefully we're going to organize like at least a couple of workshops for the all-female space.
Yes.
And maybe some retreats as well next year.
Yeah, I think we're looking at something potentially in August or then latest September, like for the workshops. And then let's see how we take it from there.
Yeah. Yes. Exciting.
Yeah, super exciting. Yeah.
I've got one more question. How has your journey of becoming a mom changed how you view the world and your like who you are as a person?
Oh, that's a big question. Yes. Yeah, where to start, honestly. Yeah, just becoming a mom and parenting, I feel like it's teaching me so much every day about myself and about life, but essentially probably also has led me to really question my values and like what's really important to me in life. Again, after during pregnancy too, but then also like once she was born, my daughter or our daughter. I think one thing that's been really present for myself and for us as a family is like this idea of really questioning, the kind of the status quo or like the norm in the way of like, how do we really want to live as a family? Like what is really serving all three of us? And personally, I can say for myself, for example, that because I just love my work and I find so much meaning and fulfillment in it. And especially, like, I mean, the first few months were really special, but there was like, and I was really immersed, I think, with my little one. But there came a point where I personally felt like, okay, I think I'm still like very attached to her and like there's some form of symbiosis between us. But at the same time, I also feel or reconnected to that desire of like actually pursue somehow my work or like kind of go back to my career or it's not even for me because for me my work, I think it's just different than what it used to be. It's not like this job that I go to 9 to 5. But it's something that actually gives my life so much meaning and purpose and is so fulfilling in many ways. So yeah, when that point came, I personally feel really lucky that I have a partner that's really open and has always been really open to kind of share the care work, I would say. So, and I mean, we're like exploring and like, I think, at some point I started working again and just even by just giving a few sessions a week, and he's working part-time and we are like constantly, well not constantly, but every now and then checking in and kind of assessing, okay, is this setup working for us? But in general, I think it has really opened me up again to look into that question of like, how do we as a family want to live and like not only follow that whatever society has told me or us for a long time, like how we were raised, like this idea of like, okay, this is family. Like, for example, it's the three of us, he goes to work, I stay at home, and that's how it is for the rest of the time, kind of. And to just really question that and find our own way in it. That's been a big one for me and us, I think. But then, many other things as well. I think, I honestly think that one topic, I think it's not very spoken about a lot in society but like how motherhood or probably parenthood, I mean, I can't talk so much for the fathers, but how motherhood is like such a deep transition in life and how it can also even lead you into a little bit of like an identity crisis because all of a sudden, you have a little, like there's this little being and a big responsibility. But then also, like, at least for me, especially in these first few months, there was a lot of just questioning of like, okay, who am I now? Like, I'm a mom, and I love my little one, and I'm very immersed in her or like with her and immersed in this experience. But like, I'm also still me. So how do I bring these two parts together now? And like, how can they both be there? And I personally find the older she gets, the easier it actually is to have like to have both of them there and for me to balance them. And I also find that if I go and do things like this, for example, that bring me a lot of fulfillment, and I just enjoy it a lot. That when I then go home, I'm much more present, or because I feel really fulfilled and charged up, and I have a lot of capacity to be with her then and like fully be present and enjoy being with her, rather than, maybe dreading, it sounds really harsh, but like dreading the care work and kind of desiring to be somewhere else.
Well, it's funny. I think there can be a pattern that can be passed on, something I've observed, which is almost like the martyr, you know, and that idea of like love equals sacrifice.
Yes.
And, someone having kids and then, consciously or unconsciously giving up on their dreams or what they want for the children, but then in some way resenting them for that and never actually being able to speak to that, but then it's spilling over in the energetics of how they treat them and deal with them. And I think it's, another example of needing to put your own oxygen mask on first, even in a context when there is someone who's fully dependent on you being there maybe 24/7, at least for quite some time. So it's a really interesting dance, and I think it's a really important topic to talk about as well.
Yeah, so much. And I mean, personally, I can also say that at least for the first year, it's been like a real big challenge for me to really prioritize myself and like to like, and I've known that, like, and I've had many people tell me that, like, so from the like intellectually I knew that, but like to really put it in place and to like, it just brought up a lot of new like beliefs and patterns around like feeling guilty if I do that, for example, right? Like feeling guilty if I take time for me, knowing that she's quite dependent on me, but then also trusting actually her dad, for example, enough to let them do their thing and like really invite him in to be more part of this unit of the three of us. And there's just a lot of new dynamics and patterns that came up in this first year, especially.
And I think also for you having that background now in understanding nervous system, also how, trauma happens and how, it's actually the loss of our basic needs in early ages that ends up on the therapist chair many years later, or the breathwork chair, So I think having that awareness means you probably are much more likely to make the right decisions and choices to support her having, the most easeful path, while also being able to do your thing without having huge amounts of guilt, because you know that as long as she's receiving love and she's looked after and you're able to show up in many ways, and then you're, responding to her like in a loving, respectful way, and all these kind of things, you're not getting triggered, you're not reacting, playing out old patterns, then ultimately she's going to be set up for the best future, and that you also get to have a pretty nice one as well.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, in general, I would say just knowing a little bit, quite a bit, but a little bit about the nervous system is also just really helpful in parenting, and just kind of knowing where they're at and like, and just kind of maybe sometimes not taking things too personal and like kind of stepping back and being like, okay, like she needs to go through this emotion right now, because it's like, it's actually like when she can move through it, it's probably going to help her, and it's not going to like, she's not going to get stuck in it, or it's like not going to be trapped or just stuck in her body, but like she can actually process something that she's experiencing right now and feeling, and I can like support her in it, and then she'll move out of it at some point, and then just move back into a different space kind of. So there's many different ways, I guess, how that understanding of the nervous system is so helpful.
And that's going to build then resilience, which means she feels like comfortable to go into that by herself in the future, which means she's not going to avoid later in life experiences which might resurface that same emotion, which she was unconsciously taught by her parents is not welcome or good, or she shouldn't have it.
Yes.
So it's basically all the stuff that we're doing with clients aged 30 to 50 is the stuff that you're doing in real time with her now, and like laying down new tracks.
True. Like honestly, sometimes I sit with her and I'm like, oh, I think I've done this with a client before. It's like just holding, it's a lot of space holding actually.
Sure,
Like, just being with what is.
Yeah. Nervous system for parents coming in hot soon.
But personally, I would, I don't know, maybe it's coming at some point, but I think there would be so much valuable insights like to teach about this more, to just share this knowledge more for parents, and just give them a little bit of an understanding and guideline about what's going on for them or could be going on.
Yeah, because they'll probably, if ironically, for a lot of parents, if they knew it was going to in some way help or benefit their child, they'd probably learn it. If it was for them, maybe they'd be less on the priority list. But ironically, they'd probably learn a lot about themselves in their own childhood and their own like patterns and stuff as a result.
Yeah.
It really is the golden key to all of the answers, or a lot of the answers anyway, as to why the way we are.
True. Yeah, and I mean, those patterns, they just tell so much about our past and the story kind of our lives. But then once, I personally think at least, like once they become, once they come more to the surface and we're actually able to, just have some more awareness around it, because then that's the point where when we can work with them, right? And then we can shift them and clear them, so then the path forward might actually look very differently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Thank you so much for joining me today, Pia. It's been a pleasure. We had a great weekend with teaching the facilitators, and now you're going back to Hamburg, I think, this evening.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
So we'll be up and down for the summer, a couple of workshops, retreats, and more training. Yeah. What's next for you in terms of on the horizon other than that?
Yeah, personally, I've also been working on an online course about the nervous system, actually in German. So I hope to finalize that within the next few weeks. It's still in the editing and finalizing phase. So that's kind of where some of my attention is. And then probably the training actually is the next big thing, and working on this let's say like a concept or idea for just creating an offer for businesswomen. So that's probably the next two or three things that are coming alive.
Okay, great. Well, if you are a woman then and you do the business, then P is your woman. So
thank you so much.
Thanks for joining me. Looking forward to next time.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me, Pete. It's been a big joy and pleasure.
First time?
On your podcast, yes. Yeah. Or in general.
You've done other podcasts?
I've done one, and I have another one actually next week, interestingly.
Cool. Yeah. Okay, great. Rack them up.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining this one.
Thank you so much. Yeah.